afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming here today and for your patience as well. My name is Lynn Parisi. I am a part of the Gloucester 400 committee to organize being a really broad word, the anniversary in 2023. I'm also the chair of the Gloucester 400 Heritage Committee. And I want to welcome all of you to the Blue Collar Cafe. Most of you have been in here, Cafe 7 Seas. Well, now you're in a different place. It's the Blue Collar Cafe in the Gloucester House. And we're sitting not so high here on Fisherman's Cove, but here we are. It's a wonderful thing. First, though, I really want to thank, over and above, many times to thank, Lenny and Dottie Linquata. They've graciously opened their doors to us, and their continued generosity and kindness really to all of Gloucester, especially last winter. The Grace Center was here all winter long. It was amazing. So we very much appreciate their generosity to all of us and to myself as well. They've been very kind to me. My deepest thanks also to those of you out there, you know who you are, who contributed to making this twice postponed event happen and for indulging me during all of its planning. The pandemic definitely put an unnerving spin on every aspect of our lives, including Gloucester 400's planning. And we all appreciate the input, the patience, the suggestions, and we'll need more of your support and you as we move along closer to 2023. To all who volunteered, and I say volunteered more or less, a lot of strong arming going on my part. Not really, but some. We really appreciate you as well. It's the narrators, the readers, the musicians. All I asked for was one trumpet, and these folks wanted to be here and participate. How cool is that? 5 of them. And they were gathered by David Benjamin, and unfortunately, our program went to print before I got all their names in there, but they'll come up later in the program, their names. And also I want to thank 1623 Studios for being here. Adrian up in the corner back there. Wave to Adrian. Adrian, hey Adrian. Thanks for being here. And all of the Gloucester 400 team, you honor us and those who came before us just by your work being here today, and it's very much appreciated. So before we get underway, there's little flies up here, little fruit flies. Before we get underway, a little bit of housekeeping notes. So please stay seated during the program. There will be an intermission between centuries, which is kind of hilarious to just say out loud. Intermission between centuries. Unless you need to use the facilities, which of course you passed on the way in the entry door. The bar will be open to us again during the intermission, but not during the program. And there is no food service in the cafe, in the Blue Collar Cafe, because this place is actually closed. And you folks are only the second event to happen here in 2 years. I know. Pretty cool. And unvaccinated guests are asked to keep their masks on. You'll need to use your fastest ears today. Hopefully you brought them. And please stay attentive to the program as there's a bit of attendee participation involved. Excuse me. For instance, those of you at tables, you'll see some little fortune cookies, sort of slips of paper on there. There'll be a place for you to participate if you choose to. Or not, totally up to you. So about this program, the information being relayed in the program was gleaned from more than 20 resources. I'm happy to share a list of those resources with anybody that's interested, rather than rattling them off now. Though striving for historical accuracy is always paramount, historical resources and records have limitations. They have errors, they have inaccuracies. As all humans, including those who record and relay history, do. So briefly, in 2000, I'm not going through all of that century, but in 2000, my family and I were very fortunate to visit 3 different countries. Try that with 3 little kids. While in London, we had the special opportunity to see a live theater production as we sat in our own front and center box in one of the fabulous, very old theaters in London's West End. The show's title was History of the World Abridged. 3 hilarious performers, thousands of years of history, told in a little more than 1 3/4 hours. It was the most fast-paced performance I have ever seen to date, jam-packed with significant snatches of impactful world history. Today's program is similar, but to a very much lesser degree, and it's not hilarious. It's very real, because what you'll hear about today were your ancestors, your family, the people who came before us. The events our narrators will share with you today, though chronological and significant, are just that, snatches and grabs taken from millions of daily events that happened right here in Gloucester, the colonies, the new America, because we're switching to the new America during this program, and in the world during our 2nd and 3rd centuries that have greatly affected our community's growth, just as these crazy events are happening now. In late 2022, Gloucester 400 History and Heritage Speakers Series will take place. It'll start in 2022 because we're starting pre-1623 in 2022 so that we can start, with 1623 and afterwards in 2023. Today's program is somewhat of a prelude for that, when we'll all take in marine and fishery-related events on land and sea. We'll be saluting our veterans. That'll be a focus as well. And we'll be focusing on all aspects of arts in Gloucester and shining light on our vast historical timeline with an eye cast towards the future and much more. Today's program is that much more in small, random, digestible bites. It's about gratitude for where we came from and what it's taken for us to get here. It's about the good and the great. It's about the bad and the worse and the quirks that have been happening and continue to happen about Gloucester. It's about Gloucester's people, present and past, and their stories. It's about all of us. On this significant day, exactly 400 days away from the beginning of 2023, I am pleased to invite to the podium my longtime friend, former mayor of Gloucester, one of the tri-chairs of Gloucester 400, but mostly a guy who grew up on Main Street, Bruce Toby.
Thank you, Lynn. And not just for that introduction. If you know Lynn Parisi, you know that when she takes on a project, it is an exercise in pouring her heart and soul into what she's doing, and you have done just that. And I thank you for it very deeply. Gloucester 400 isn't just happening. There's been a whole lot of information gathering and input that we've sought. This is a critical event in that year's celebration because it is the foundation of Gloucester 400, that what we will be doing as a community is reflecting on where we've been, how we got here, recognizing our strengths, acknowledging our flaws, both historic and current, and then using them to build, to pivot, to inform the community's decisions as it embarks on its 5th century. So, What better way to do that than through the series that Lynn and others have put together of illuminations. The first occurred 2 years ago, roughly today, the Saturday after Thanksgiving, in the UU Church up on Middle Street. And it was a stunner of an event with reflections on our first century. And again, not flinching from talking about issues that arose in treatment of the indigenous people and the shadow of slavery as it impacted our community. And yet acknowledging folks working together, becoming a team to overcome hardship and to begin laying another set of foundations then for what we have here today. It didn't happen, the second century didn't happen last year because we were living history. We experienced the pandemic together. It will impact Gloucester just as it's impacted each of us already in the lives we lead. That makes, on year 3, the occurrence of this event, I think, all the more special as we consider centuries 2 and 3 together. And you'll see it's meant to be interactive. A few things that seem a little odd might happen, go with the flow. And there'll be accent points as well with some really nice selections of music and other events to keep this lifted, to uplift this event. And as Lynn mentioned, the other thing that makes this significant is 400 days and counting, people. 400 days and counting. And that's when 2023, the year of celebration begins, with some sort of launch event that I think we'll all enjoy and remember for a long time, and then a whole lot more to follow. Now, the first of our 2 narrators, and again, remember there'll be 1 for each of the 2 centuries that we're going to cover today, is uniquely qualified to be engaging this project today. Her name is Beth Welland. Beth's going to narrate our 2nd century, running from 1723 to 1823. She's going to lead us through a very quick recitation of highlights, noteworthy events. Beth studied at University of California, Berkeley, Gordon College, and Salem State, earning degrees in history and education. Today, she's going to put both of those skills to work, educating us in some deep dives of her own into history. She's also been a teacher at St. Anne's School, where she served for 16 years. She created the Gloucester History Sharing Program, which was an outreach effort of the Schooner Adventure, the Gloucester Adventure Project, and it ran through 2010 through 2013. Presented as well a Gloucester History Photo Program at the Rose Baker Senior Center, the Seacoast Nursing Home, and at other venues. Very recently as well, she took all the work she has done studying Gloucester's experiences with urban renewal, and she's turned them into an informative program with some amazing slides showing what Gloucester was like. It's a 2-part presentation that I hope she'll be doing again soon. It was at the Sawyer Library already, and a lot of folks were very positively struck by it. The programs are unique because on one hand, they're very closely researched, but on the other hand, they're always works in progress. And I take it today is no less the case, which is to say, like any good historian, her research never stops. And today, each of you could be a research tool. If she misses something, if you hear something you can add to, either because of reading or research you've done yourselves, or because you happen to know someone who knew something, share it. Don't be shy. The interactivity begins with Beth. And that being the case, I'm going to stop talking and turn the table over to our first narrator. Please join me in welcoming Beth Welland.
Okay, as Bruce said, we're starting at 1723. Okay, it's not known if Gloucester celebrated its centennial that year, most likely not. But they did dedicate the green that year to be for public use forever as a military training ground. Luckily, we're not using it in that purpose anymore. It's now the Rotary. your opinion, which is better. It was the year that the last of the woodland apportioned land grants were made. Over 1,000 acres in our common pastures were laid out in 136 woodlots. And later in the year, the remainder of the land, some 1,500 acres, was laid out in about 94 lots. During this time, pirates were threatening our vessel and the shores. Fishing was conducted in a somewhat extensive scale at Annisquam, not here in the harbor. Okay? All right, we have some slides to show. Oh, okay, I just keep going. All right, so now we move to December 1732. Benjamin Franklin's Poor Richard's Almanac began a 26-year run supplying people in Gloucester then, and us now, nearly 290 years later, with sayings that hold true through the test of time. Okay, Gloucester High School seniors Emily Correo and Calvin Del Vecchio will share some of Benjamin Franklin's well-known expressive phrases with us. Please welcome to the podium Emily and Calvin.
Poor Richard's Almanac was a famous creation of America's Renaissance man, Benjamin Franklin. Franklin published the Almanac once a year from 1732 to 1758. Almanacs at this time were very important to people as they provided a year-long calendar and information on times for sunrises, sunsets, and phases and tides of the moon. Farmers depended on this information. Almanacs also used to include schedules for public meetings and social events and tips for farming and medicine. The name and title of the almanac refers to the author, who was identified as Richard Saunders, a pseudonym that Franklin used. Franklin said of himself in his autobiography, "I consider it a proper vehicle for conveying instruction among the common people, who buy scarcely any other books." Poor Richard's Almanac was unique at the time as it contained annual updates in the lives of various people in the form of a serial. Franklin's idea was to introduce the various episodes in people's lives, real or fiction, to make storylines so compelling that finding out what would actually happen in the lives, people would end up buying the almanac again. Poor Richard's Almanac contains astronomical and astrological information, weather predictions, math exercises, and poems and sayings. It was these sayings for which Poor Richard's Almanac is remembered most. Some well-known examples include, "One today is worth two tomorrows," "Diligence is the mother of good luck,"
"He that speaks much is mistaken," "Beware of the little expenses. A small leak will sink a great ship." It is better to give many injuries than it is to give one.
"Early to bed and early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise."
"Necessity is the mother of invention. No gains without pains."
"Speak in speed, the closed mouth catches no flies."
"Great modesty often hides great merit. It is hard for an empty bag to stand upright. A friend in need is a friend indeed."
"If you would not be forgotten as soon as you are dead and rotten, either write things worth reading or do things worth writing."
"A long life may not be good enough, but a good life is long enough."
Better to slip with foot than tongue.
Lost time is never found again.
"Humility makes great men honorable."
God helps them that help themselves.
Yeah, very good.
"A true friend is the best possession."
Wish not to live long as to live well.
Well done is better than well said.
Clean your finger before you point it at my spots.
He that lies down with dogs shall rise up with fleas.
Ignorance leads men into a party, and shame keeps them from getting out again. Fish and visitors stink in 3 days.
And finally, "Speak little, do much."
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily and Kelvin, and our audience members were brave enough to pitch in. It's always more fun when there's more people involved. All right, back to our timeline. 1738, throat distemper, which we now know as diphtheria, caused the death of 31 children in Sandy Bay Parish. The next year, 1739, 60 Gloucester families began heading north to an area north of Yarmouth and Freeport, and what was still Massachusetts then, after petitioning the General Court of Massachusetts for a 6-mile tract of land in which to settle. The name chosen for their town was in hope that of what the new settlers knew here in Gloucester, so they named it New Gloucester. And it's still there, but it's now the state of Maine. In 2021, the population of New Gloucester, Maine was just under 6,000, with early Gloucester surname families still in residence. These New Gloucester residents will be invited to our Gloucester 400th anniversary in 2023, as they are part of our story. All right, 1744, King George's War begins. The third of the 4 French and Indian Wars takes place primarily in the British provinces of New York, Massachusetts Bay, New Hampshire, and Nova Scotia. On June 2nd, 1744, Massachusetts declared war against Quebec. In March of 1745, the story of Gloucester's Peg Wesson and her curse on 3 of Gloucester's militiamen unfolds. We will learn more about Peg Wesson and what happened to those 3 militiamen who find their cursed selves serving combat duty in Louisburg and Cape Breton in June 1745, when the Gloucester 400th History and Heritage Speaker Series begins. During King George's War, which lasts until 1748, 720 seasoned Gloucester men sail and trek far north into the northern Canadian province to endure continual violent battles. The only important victory is the New Englanders' capture of Louisburg on Cape Breton Island on June 15, 1745. Up to 1750, here, the common settlement is thriving. Post-1750, the common settlement begins to decline as families give up logging and farming to enter fishing and shipping businesses closer to the harbor village. The population of Gloucester at this time, 2,700. Nearly 3/4 of the fishing fleet consists of native-born men. Between 1745 through 1763, King Philip's French and Indian 7-Year War is in effect. Gloucester militiamen took part in that as well. 1754, German immigrants introduced hammering to split Cape Ann granite. On November 18th, 1755, the Great Cape Ann earthquake happened off the coast of Gloucester and caused great alarm. Present estimates agree that it was between a 6.0 and a 6.3 on the Richter scale. It remains the largest earthquake in the history of Massachusetts. Not sure why, if this is a result or not, but the Meeting House whipping posts and stocks were erected. Okay. Stamp Act passes, with many in Gloucester predicting it would greatly obstruct trade and business of the province. And Arcadians from Nova Scotia are quartered for a short time in the town. 1760, Massachusetts Governor Bernard obtains a royal land grant on Mount Desert Island. Remember, it's still Massachusetts at that time. He attempts to secure his claim by offering free land to settlers. Abraham Soames and James Richardson of Gloucester accept the offer, and the next year, 1761, Abraham Soames, his wife Hannah, and their 4 children became the first settlers of European descent on Mount Desert Island. Additional Gloucester families who removed to Mount Desert Island and Bar Harbor early in 1761 include the surnames Gott, Lurvy, Fernald, Sargent, Carroll, and Bernard. Many descendants of these and other Gloucester surnamed families still live on Mount Desert and in the surrounding towns. These will be invited to attend our 400th anniversary, as they are also part of our story. Britain ordered all French Acadians to leave Nova Scotia, and some families were moved here to Cape Ann. And we had a general question: does anybody know if you're a descendant from those Acadians? Aha, we have one. And we still are harboring them. There we go. Okay. 1765, Gloucester population is 3,763. Over 300 slaves are on Cape Ann, and most likely they're not part of that number because they weren't considered people. Right? 1766, Gloucester celebrates the repeal of the Stamp Act amid bonfires and illuminations, growing in Gloucester's evening sky. 1770, the Gloucester Freemason, I'm going to say this wrong, Tyrian Lodge is established. Many prominent Gloucester men join. Some of their descendants are now members of the merged Tyrian and Acacia lodges. In 1774, just before going into the American Revolution, Gloucester's population is about 4,500. Special constables were named in case smallpox should come again. In 1775, some 400 Gloucester men are serving in the Revolution. Captains Warner and Foster were among those serving and commanding the 6th Essex Militia Regiment. Okay, that is a tongue twister. April 19, 1775, the battles of Lexington and Concord signaled the start of the American Revolutionary War and will continue until 1783. On June 17, 1775, the Battle of Breed's Hill, which we all incorrectly originally learned as Bunker, yes, is a major battle of the American Revolution and is one of the bloodiest. Gloucester men fight valiantly in the battle. On August 8, 1775, Gloucester residents battle with the British warship Falcon here in Gloucester Harbor. 2 Gloucester men, Benjamin Rowe and Peter Lurvy, are fatally wounded. The Falcon is driven away from Gloucester Harbor and escapes to Salem. Okay, quiz. On July 4th, 1776, the Continental Congress approved what? Okay, you just passed 5th grade social studies. Right. Gloucester celebrated it with that time with lighting beacons on the sides of the present Fitzhenry Lane house area, and the population at that time was 4,512. Between 1775 and 1779, a total of 1,565 men from Gloucester served in the war. Victims of the war from Gloucester between that time period totaled 375 who perished either at sea, fell in battle, or died on prison ships. Okay, the Gloucester Unitarian Universalist Church began its storied history in 1779 as the first Universalist congregation in the United States. It is founded by the Reverend John Murray, one of the earliest preachers of universal salvation, and a small group of descendants from Gloucester's first parish church. This group organized in 1779 as the Independent Christian Church. During this time, at that time, the Revolutionary War ends, peace is declared, and Gloucester starts to recoup and regroup. In 1786, the congregants of the Independent Christian Church sue and win a landmark ruling that they could not be taxed to support a church to which they did not belong. This ruling predates the ratification of the First Amendment of the USS Constitution and the first of the 10 amendments included in the Bill of Rights by 5 years. On February 6, Massachusetts becomes the 6th state to enter the Union. 1790, Gloucester's population is now 5,317. And there are 2 rope works in the town. 1723, 1791, in 1791, the Bill of Rights is adopted. And then December of that same year, the First Amendment of the Constitution is ratified. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or of the right of the people to peaceably assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. In 1793, the Lowell Boat Shop up in Amesbury began building thousands of dories in the Simeon Lowell tradition, most of which were for the Gloucester fishing fleet. Unfortunately, that same year, throat distemper, that diphtheria, carried off 62 of the children from the town. In 1800, Gloucester's population is 5,313. 1,304 of that number live in Sandy Bay. On April 24th, 1800, the Library of Congress was established. Also, a windmill was built next to Pavilion Beach. About 600 men and 200 tobacco boats are engaged in the shore fishery for cod. The Grand Banks fishery is almost totally abandoned at that point. Mackerel catching is pursued by small boats. In 1801, in Annisquam, a lighthouse was built on Wigwam Point. On July 11th, in 1804, Aaron Burr and Alexander Hamilton had their famous duel. Okay. Would you ever dream that a musical production would follow 215 years later? Also in 1804, the most severe storm ever felt in this part of America slammed Gloucester, and many boats were lost or disabled. 1804 is also when Henry, or Hugh as we kind of knew him, for Lane, was born. Next year, 1805, the daily stage line is established from Gloucester to Boston. On December 22nd, 1807, the Embargo Act affects Gloucester as it prohibits American or foreign vessels from leaving the United States to foreign ports. The Enforcing Act of 1809 permitted port collectors to seize goods that even appeared to be destined for foreign parts. The town of Gloucester passed a law against the Embargo Act. Between 1810 and 1835, a distillery was making rum on the site where Minglewood Harbor side is now. In 1811, a committee report reported that public inoculation of the smallpox, should be communicated to all classes of our fellow citizens. And in 1812, the British embargo on American vessels already in place before Congress declared war on Great Britain. All right, the War of 1812 lasts until 1815, and it impacted Gloucester greatly and not well. Some 552 Gloucester men served. The conflict was between the United States and the indigenous allies on one side, and the United Kingdom and its dependent colonies, indigenous allies in Spain on the other. Restriction of trade was more injurious to the United States during that war. Forts were erected here in town or actually rebuilt and reactivated, Fort Defiance and also up in Eastern Point. The fort and barracks were built at Sandy Bay on Bearskin Neck. England had 700 warships. America's very young Navy had 17. Nathaniel Harridan was aboard one of them, the USS Constitution. Andrew Harridan's Annisquam house was used as a soldier's barracks. British ships did come into our waters. They destroyed several vessels, captured coasters and fishing craft. They attacked many vessels, running them aground, seizing them, and destroying them. They are also known for shooting their cannonballs into a number of our buildings. I think every town here in the Cape Ann has a cannonball that was landed in somebody's building or a church. On September 12th through the 14th of 1814, that's when Francis Scott Key witnessed the battle over Fort Mchenry from a merchant ship in Baltimore Harbor that was in peril of being taken over. He wrote notes for a future poem about this intense and pivotal event. Later that week, he finished his poem, Defense of Fort Mchenry. His brother-in-law set the poem to music, and the combined poem and music is published today under the name of the Star-Spangled Banner. The War of 1812 ended in a draw on the battlefield, and the peace treaty of Ghent went into effect in 1815 to reflect that. Now we're going to welcome David Benjamin, Paul Frontiero, Jamie Klopatowski, Tim Klopatowski, I'm sorry, I probably butchered that, Larry Lacey are going to play their rendition of the Star-Spangled Banner by Francis Scott Key. Please stand. Thank you, Dave, Paul, Jamie, Tim, and Larry. This concludes the first century's very quick review. Before I leave, though, I would like to refer back to what was alluded to, our speaker series. We are looking for people who can give lectures about various aspects of Gloucester's history for our Heritage Speaker Series. And we're also looking for lectures that may have been recorded already that people don't know about. So if they're out there hiding on YouTube or somebody's website, we want those references as well. We really want to spend the next 2 years recounting our history through live lectures and also utilizing these online lectures. There's some wonderful material out there, but we just don't know about all of it. So please feel free to reach out to us, to anybody on the committee. You see a lot of names on that program, and they can direct you to the right place for us to do that. Okay, there's going to be a 15-minute break before we go to the next or the third century. This is a good time to use the restroom and to refill your cups. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth. Beth, one more note. Beth sold herself a little bit short, and I don't know if this was mentioned, but Beth Welland is actually the chair of the 2023 Speaker Series, FYI. So we'll be back in 15 minutes.
Get ready.
everybody. Let's resume with Century 2 for today and Gloucester's 3rd century. One thing, where'd Beth go? Where's Beth? Beth's in the back of the room. She talked a little bit about your talking to her and coordinating. Look, she did a great job, right? Did she not do a great job? And then she talks about the committee and the whole concept of the Gloucester 400 speaker series. What she didn't tell you, and I'm announcing this for Ruth Pito and Bob Gillis, my co-chairs as tri-chairs on this effort, because no good deed goes unpunished. She is chair of that committee now. So you go, Beth. And Lynn forgot something. Uh-oh.
I totally forgot to write this in the scripts that are all over the place. But I wanted to make sure all of you knew that our musicians just finished playing obviously a number called the Gloucester Fanfare. It was by our local musician and composer who was actually world-renowned now, Rob Bradshaw. For any of you that know Rob, back in the day when he was an undergrad, my middle son Scott, when he was at Beeman School, actually took trumpet lessons from Rob. And now look what happens to a Gloucester guy. But I wanted to let all of you know that because David Benjamin and his group of bards over there who are wonderful, David Benjamin, Paul Frontiero, Dave, I already said Dave Benjamin. Help me here. I said Paul Frontiero. Don't stand up. Yeah, I know. Exactly. Jamie Klopotowski, Tim Klopotowski, and Larry Lacey never played that together before. How cool is that? So I was...
I should also mention Mr. Bradshaw wrote that piece.
I did say that.
That's correct. I was going to
Aha,
step on
thank
my
you.
line, David. Stepped on my line.
Now back to Bruce.
He did it. He played it at the launch party, as I recall, David, on January 1st, 1998. Also, one more thing to thank Beth for. She pointed out in her rundown of history, population, and included within it was the population of places like Sandy Bay. And never forget that Rockport was part of Gloucester. And hence, if you ever hear me slip and refer not to Rockport, but towards 6, that's the historic foundation for it. Just wanted to point that out. Thank you, Beth, for legitimizing it.
Coming up in the 3rd century.
That said, we're now going to move on to the period of 1823 to 1922, Gloucester's 3rd century. And I'm honored to introduce the narrator for that portion of our history as we illuminate it as part of this process this evening. This man is a native son of Gloucester, and he captures the diversity of our history and time. On one hand, I'm going to give you a clue, the Tars were among the original settlers, going back to the earliest time. And yet, on the other side, his mom's side, Italiadorsis came here roughly a century ago. And the melting pot that is Gloucester is so well represented in him. Gloucester through and through as a Gloucester Public Schools student all the way, graduating in the GHS class of '82. And then he got his undergraduate degree from Suffolk University and went on to get his law degree there as well. But more critically, he's dedicated his career to serving the people of Cape Ann. And he's done it well. He's done it really well. First as a state representative. I was a rookie mayor. He was a rookie state rep together. We propped each other up, but he did so much in that role. And then moved on to the state senate, representing the 1st Essex and Middlesex district, and now serving as the minority leader of the Massachusetts State Senate. And those things he's doing us proud, but on the other hand, I introduced Bruce Tarr to you tonight as someone we all think of as our friend and a neighbor. Bruce Tarr.
Well, thank you, Bruce, so much. It's an honor to be here with all of you tonight. And Bruce, I don't know where our part of the history will be when in our early days as mayor and representative, but I look forward to that. But it's an honor to be introduced by you, and it's an honor to move on with all of you to Gloucester's 3rd century. Now, it's going to move fast, so fasten your seatbelts, and here we go. The ropes that run through our next 100 years, 1823 through 1922, are mostly related to fishing. The industry sees progressive changes, though the cost is that hundreds of men and boys continue to be lost at sea. But fish is sustenance, the demand is great, and work is work. The fishing is good, and it smells like money. Gloucester is growing quickly, taking on each hurdle as it comes along, and it's looking forward. After reading the book Lone Voyager by the late and beloved Gloucester author Joe Garland, Gloucester's own Alan Estes and Frank Tedesco were moved in the mid-1990s into the early 2000s to write a suite of songs about Gloucester's fishing heritage. One of their songs, Not With Your Hands, exemplifies the tenacity, the fortitude, and the can-do spirit found in Gloucester's young fishing industry, including the legendary Howard Blackburn. This sometimes heart-wrenching but lively spirit was as pervasive in Gloucester's age of sail, which threads through the century we'll shine light on next, as it is in the present. The spirit has been alive since men began casting their nets on the water. Please welcome Alan Estes performing Not With Your Hands.
Thank you, Joe Garland, for writing The Lone Voyager. If you're visiting here in Gloucester and you want to really read a great historical book about one of the most just incredible guys that ever came along, read The Lone Voyager, which is about Howard Blackburn. If you live in Gloucester and you haven't read it, well, you better get your shit together before the 400th happens, okay? And read that book. All right. Days at sea in a winter storm in my trawling made in 1883. With frostbit hands I rode for land 60 miles away. Poor Tom, before he froze to death, had nothing good to say. He said, Howard, you won't make it to shore. There ain't no power in your hands anymore. But I said one thing this survivor understands. You row with your heart, not with your hands. You row with your heart, not with your hands. Hey! For both my thumbs, I ran around in Gloucester by for fishermen and bums. I bragged I'd sailed to Europe in a tiny sloop alone. They laughed until I did it twice and broke their scarping toe. And they said, Howard, you shouldn't sail anymore. There ain't no power in your hands like before. But I said one thing, this survivor understands. Yeah, you sail with your heart, not with your hand. You sail with your heart, not with your hand. Hey! Their cutting words will keep you down on your knees like a foul mutating disease. Pessimism is deceiving, so you gotta keep believing to overcome belligerency. I trekked around the continent, search of fame and gold. I failed and they all said I was too reckless, rash and bold. But I was just a salty Gloucesterman who would not turn out dead, who heard refrains of victory instead of what they said. They said, Howard, you shouldn't dream anymore. There ain't no power in a man who's not whole. But I said one thing, this survivor understands. You dream with your heart, not with your hand. You dream with your heart, not with your hand. And I said one thing, this survivor understands. You dream with your heart, not with your hands. Hey! Mrs. Yo. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. The literary genius of Joe Garland coming to life with us this afternoon through Alan Estes. What a great afternoon it is. We'll return to Alan in just a little bit at the end of the century. But now, on with our story. In 1823, the town of Gloucester barely notices that 200 years as a community have passed. The town does take notice, though, that codfish are plentiful. The granite quarry industry begins at Pigeon Cove. Advertisements for granite paving blocks appear in Boston newspapers. During the years 1823 through 1917, the codfish industry amounted to $5 million. Around 1825, the first organized camping out parties coming from Boston to Gloucester started. This may have been the beginning of tourism on the island. Let's think about that for a minute. The late Joe Garland, in his book Down to the Sea, tells us that in 1828, the Gloucester fleet included 154 schooner fishing vessels over 20 tons. During the 1830s, the once thriving urban center of Gloucester, the Common Settlement, becomes mostly uninhabited, earning its moniker Dogtown. In 1830, Gloucester's population is 7,510. The Indian Removal Act goes into effect throughout America. The Gloucester Lyceum and the Lanesville Congregational Church are established. On September 16th, a house fire on Front Street, which is now Main Street, owned by Samuel Gilbert, catches fire and causes a conflagration which spreads through and destroys 27 other houses and 43 stores in the business district. The West End is rebuilt with brick in 1831. The first Irishmen arrive to work in the quarries. The 36-foot-high Eastern Point Lighthouse, planned in 1829, is erected in 1832. It's first lit on January 1st, 1832. Guess a version of fireworks. Regular fishing trips to George's Bank begin. In 1833, 443 vessels are at anchor in the harbor besides what lay as wharves, as recorded by federal surveyor John Mason. In 1836, there is only one building besides the ruins at the fort. In 1837, fishermen here number 1,580. The panic of 1837 financial crisis touches off a major depression, followed by an economic collapse. The panic deeply affects all of Gloucester's residents, businesses, and our economy. In 1839, the last common settlement resident, Cornelius Finson, also known as Black Neil, is found barely alive in the cellar of a collapsed, abandoned home. He is taken to the poorhouse, where he survives for only 7 days. During the mid-1840s, the earliest Azorean immigrants settle in Gloucester. More Irish families arrive, followed by Finnish and Swedish immigrants. Were your families or ancestors among them? Let's see a show of hands. Very good, very good. It's known, yet it is surprising to many immigrating, that many surnames are often being changed upon entering the United States. Many surnames become anglicized, many are corrupted, and many are literal translations from immigrants' language of origin. An example is the short list of some well-known Azorean surnames in Gloucester that morphed from their original Portuguese to anglicized English. Yeah. And I'm sure all of us are familiar with some of those changes. In 1840, Sandy Bay formally secedes from Gloucester and becomes the town of Rockport. Bruce, Ward 6 went away at that point. The population of Gloucester is 6,394. The population of Rockport is 2,728. 189 schooners are fishing out of Gloucester in 1884. Gloucester Town Hall is built, and much later is rented to the American Legion organization. The first telegraph message takes place from Washington, D.C. to Baltimore, Maryland by Morse and Company. In 1846, a parcel of Magnolia land with a house on it, now 61 Shore Road, is sold for $20 to Benjamin Adams. Surely a good investment. In 1847, the Eastern Railroad Company builds a train depot in Gloucester, and their first locomotive huffs into the city. Between 1848 and 1855, the California gold rush draws people from all over North America who aim to strike it rich. In 1849, Gorton's of Gloucester is founded. Fitzhenry Lane, known to locals as Hugh, builds his granite home. The Pavilion Hotel is built. On September 18th, 1850, the Fugitive Slave Law is enacted by act of Congress. Abolitionists call it the Bloodhound Law, as it requires that slaves be returned to their owners even if they're in a free state. The act also makes the federal government responsible for finding, returning, and trying escaped slaves. The act becomes one of the causes of the Civil War. In 1850, Gloucester's population is 7,786. Rockport's is 3,274. The Port of Gloucester has 184 vessels. During the 1850s, Gloucester rebounds from the panic of 1837, a result of increased gold and silver flowing from the California gold rush. And Gloucester's fisheries are booming. Again, when writing about the year 1850 in his book Down to the Sea, the late Joe Garland said, "One may wonder how in the world the saltwater country hamlet of Essex, just north of Gloucester, found the room for 15 shipyards on the mud banks of its tidal creek, or how they built and launched 170 fishing schooners in one 3-year stretch in the 1850s. These schooners begin fishing out of Gloucester right after they are launched and fitted out. Joe Garland continued, or where Gloucester, a generation before its peak, found the dockage, let alone the swinging room and the anchorage for a fishing fleet that long before the Civil War was growing at an astonishing rate. Rocky Neck Art Colony forms and is well underway with artists in residence. A wave of Nova Scotian immigrants arrive. How many folks here can trace their roots to that? Lynn, you're voting in multiple categories, which is typical Gloucester.
Very small families.
In 1853, the first steam engine is used for hoisting and pumping in quarries. The next year sees the post office and customs house built on the corner of Maine and Pleasant Streets. In 1855, Gloucester's population is 8,935, and Rockport's is 3,498. Approximately 700 seines and 500 masts and spars are produced here this year. Ironwork is being made in 23 Gloucester blacksmith shops. In 1856, Walt Whitman, who lived from 1819 to 1892, writes On the Beach at Night Alone, in which he discusses how everything that has ever existed or will ever exist is connected forever through time. He makes a statement about reality, the future and the past, that we can all understand and relate to. On the Beach at Night Alone reminds us, young and old, that every person, thing, and form that has ever existed is part of the same related reality. This is something to ponder in wonderment. The speaker in the poem alludes, and that should be celebrated and explored. And in fact, in Gloucester, everything is related to everything else. Please welcome back to the podium Gloucester High School senior Calvin Del Vecchio to read Walt Whitman's poem, On the Beach at Night Alone. Calvin?
On the Beach at Night Alone by Walt Whitman. On the beach at night alone, as the old mother sways her to and fro, singing her husky song. As I watch the bright stars shining, I think a thought of the clef of the universes and of the future. A vast similitude interlocks all spheres, grown, ungrown, small, large, suns, moons, planets, all distances of place, however wide, all distances of time, all inanimate forms, all souls, all living bodies, though they be ever so different or in different worlds, all gaseous, watery, vegetable, mineral processes, the fishes, the brutes, all nations, colors, barbarisms, civilizations, languages, all identities that have existed or may exist on this globe or any globe, all lives and deaths, all of the past, present, and future. This vast similitude spans them and has always spanned and shall forever span them and compactly hold them and enclose them.
Thank you, Calvin. The Panic of 1857 becomes the first worldwide financial panic. It is caused by the declining and overexpansion of the domestic economy. The sinking of the steamship Central America contributes to the Panic of 1857, as New York banks were awaiting a much-needed shipment of gold that went down with the ship. Gloucester residents and businesses feel the effects, and yet they endure. The financial decline lasts until the onset of the Civil War in 1861. By 1859, there are no fewer than 301 Gloucester schooners, crewed by 3,568 men and boys. augmented by another fleet of inshore boats fishing out of Gloucester. Between 1860 and 1906, a staggering 660 Gloucester vessels sink. While many of the fishermen were saved, 3,880 men are lost. It's not the fish you're buying, it's men's lives, writes Sir Walter Scott in his 1860 novel, The Antiquary. There is a price to pay for the fish that graces our tables. In 1860, the population in Gloucester is 10,904. The first Jewish people settle in Gloucester. More Azoreans begin arriving in great numbers. In 1861, the Civil War begins, and most certainly it impacts Gloucester. Gloucester's army men total 1,026, with 476 of that number serving in the Navy. Over 100 Finns into the United States Navy to serve in the Civil War, and some settle in Gloucester after the war. The fishing industry makes gains because the Union Army is utilizing fish as a staple to feed its troops. Edward de Cohota of Gloucester becomes the only Chinese man to serve in the Civil War. Were any of your ancestors among those who served in the Civil War and perhaps made the ultimate sacrifice? Don't be shy. See 1, 2, 3,
We need to find out.
and I'm sure more. And we would love to talk to you after the program about your stories. I know yours because you're my cousin. Yep. In 1862, a single storm claims 15 schooners and 120 Gloucester men, while another devastating storm in 1879 takes the lives of 159 men. The first artillery shot in the Battle of Gettysburg in 1863 is fired by Lieutenant John H. Califf of Gloucester. The Tarn-Wanson Paint Factory begins manufacturing the first copper anti-fouling bottom paint. The Confederate raider Tacony sinks 6 Gloucester schooners on George's Bank. During the Civil War, skilled stonemasons from England, Sweden, Scotland, and Ireland arrive on Cape Ann. In 1865, the Civil War ends. On January 31st, the 13th Amendment, the abolition of slavery, is passed. On April 14th, 1865, President Abraham Lincoln is assassinated. On December 24th, 1865, the Ku Klux Klan forms. Gloucester fishing vessels now number 341, and fishermen number 4,590. The Civil Rights Act is passed on April 9th, 1866. The 1868 population of Gloucester reaches an even 12,000. On May 16th, 1869, Gloucester's town hall burns down. In the 1870s, Finnish immigrants begin arriving on Cape Ann in larger numbers. A major wave of immigration from Nova Scotia begins in 1870, and the Tarn-Wanson Paint Factory is built. Summer hotels are built in East Gloucester. According to the 1870 U.S. Census, 2,658 Portuguese entered the country during this decade, and many came to Gloucester. In 1871, the newly rebuilt town hall is dedicated. A business dedicated to making oiled clothing for fishermen is established here, and the fisheries has 570 vessels. A wooden bridge is built at Little Good Harbor Beach. From 1872 through 1983, Witham's Country Store is in operation on Eastern Avenue. Gloucester becomes incorporated as a city in 1873. The population is now 16,000. The first city election is held, with the first mayor, Robert Ripley Fears, being elected. The fishing industry engages 6,000 men and 420 vessels. The railroad bridge near the old burying ground is raised to admit passage of Phineas T. Barnum's entourage in preparation for their show at City Hall. Had nothing to do with the election. Gloucester mourns throughout 1879 as 249 men from our port are lost at sea. The month of February is so particularly devastating that when in a single gale on George's Bank, 13 ships with 159 men aboard go down. All hands are lost. In 1883, Howard Blackburn, at the age of 24, with his Dory mate Tom Welch, both crewmen on the Grace L. Fears, is adrift and feared lost off the Grand Banks during a blizzard. In 1884, Azorean settlers purchased land with the intent of building a church, Our Lady of Good Voyage Church. According to canonic law, they are required to do so in the name of the Archbishop of Boston, but they are reluctant to comply, and the dispute goes to court. In 1884, Maine native Mason Walton finds his way to Gloucester to work in the fisheries, but he looks too sickly and he isn't hired. With no place to go, he fashions a lean-to over in the woods off Old Salem Road. Walter Cressy, the owner of the land, takes pity on Mason and lets him build a log hut where Mason lives a quiet life for 33 years. During the hermit's years in Gloucester's Ravenswood, more than 50,000 people would sign his guest book. In 1886, the Statue of Liberty is completed in New York Harbor. 2021 is its 135th anniversary. The generously gifted statue from the people of France is the first hopeful and symbolic sight that immigrants on Atlantic crossings from many European ports and countries see as they are bound for the United States and on to Gloucester. Ellis Island becomes operational in 1892, and the Federal Immigration Inspection Station before entry to ports in New York and New Jersey in the United States. Nearly 12 million immigrants pass through Ellis Island while it is in operation between 1892 and 1954, including many hundreds bound for Gloucester. And I am confident that almost everyone in this room probably has a story that traces back to Ellis Island. In 1886, the Gloucester Street Railway is established in the downtown area. By the turn of the century, the horse-drawn railway is electrified and expanded to approximately 9 miles in length. In 1889, Howard Blackburn makes his first crossing of the Atlantic after having lost his fingers and some toes in 1883. The 1890s in Germany find Rudolf Diesel working for several years on prototypes of his idea, an efficient compression ignition internal combustion engine that bears his name. On August 10, 1893, the first diesel engine ignition takes place in Germany. This harbinger of the fate of the schooner fishing industry in future years eventually brings a wave of change to Gloucester's fishing industry. Between 1892 and 1900, 1,400 Finns lived on the back of the Cape. In 1893, Our Lady of Good Voyage Church is finished being built, and sadly, burns in 1914. In 1894, Gloucester poet and photographer Clarence Manningfall debuted the poem The Dory Fleet in his book of poems and photos, Points of Interest, Gloucester in Song. Fall was a Gloucester native who loved and respected fishing and fishermen and wanted to bring his readers into closer touch with this hazardous and heroic life. This poem, representative of a day in the life of a Gloucester resident who knows the daily fishing life describing what is seen in the harbor, will be read by Gloucester High School senior Emily Correo. Please welcome Emily back to the podium.
The Dory Fleet by Clarence Manningfall. When winter winds begin to blow, cruel falls the snow and sleet, I watch in fear so bravely go out onto the deep, the Dory Fleet. Each craft so frail, each skipper old, so bent and bowed with age. One pair of oars for fierce wind bold, to row till anchorage. One loose hung sail, one creaking mast, to go where seagulls go, or yawning gulfs near seaweeds vast, where death leer pales below. To drift where drowned men's bones do lie, all whitened in the kelp, wherever winds do seem to sigh, like comrades sounding help. I watch them in the early morn, I watch them late at night, yet the winter day is born, come in or wing their flight. And every skipper so old, so feeble and infirm, so easy now to feel the cold in life's declining term. Oft when the mist comes falling down in frozen sleet and snow, will robe each like little craft, like down and fierce whistles blow. And weird the winds will strangely moan, and canny sound the horn, like ghosts you'll see them drifting lone, like phantoms pale and wan. There's Davy Grayson, he's 80, all through the summer days. He'll nod and sleep before his door, his crone his old time lays. When robins mid blossoms fair do merry pipe their lay, old Davy sits within his chair and dreams of childhood days. When the yellow leaves they fall, and stilled as robin's note, old Davy seems to hear the call, from the cove he'll float. He'll round the bend by old Black Bess, he'll feeble peer and look, and in the shadows you would guess old Davy was a spook. He'll drop his line down in the deep, and gulls will scream sweet by, and half the time he's fast asleep and does not hear their cry. Great ships in sea will hurl and toss him all about. The black smoke from their stacks will curl, and fierce the winds will shout. But Davy ever seems to win, and breasts every gale, and when the Dory fleet comes in, first Davy's yellow sail.
Thank you, Emily. In 1895, Sicilians begin residing at Fort Point, the Irish having moved on. The Gloucester 400th Heritage Committee is interested in learning the surnames of the earliest Sicilian families. Was your family one of them? See those all over the house. Please stay in touch with us. In 1897, Howard Blackburn and some friends buy a schooner and plan on sailing it around Cape Horn and up to Alaska, where a gold rush is underway. Mr. Blackburn leaves the group in San Francisco after a disagreement with partners and returns home to Gloucester, never having panned for gold. On February 15th of 1898, an explosion of unknown origin sinks the battleship USS Maine in the Havana, Cuba harbor, killing 266 of the 354 crew members. The sinking of the Maine incites United States passion against Spain and eventually leads to a naval blockade of Cuba and a declaration of war that would go on between April 21st and August 13th. Some 500 Gloucester men serve in that war. An anchor from the USS Maine is on display on this Seven Seas Wharf property to help remind us to remember the Maine. Also, in 1898, the USS Gloucester, commanded by Richard Wainwright, who is ancestrally connected to our city, destroys 2 enemy vessels off Santiago, Cuba. Later in 1898, the USS Gloucester visits our city, with Commander Wainwright gifting the first American flag to fly over Puerto Rico to the city of Gloucester, Massachusetts. On this day, November 27th, in 1898, 123 years ago, the paddle steamer Portland sinks off the coast of Cape Ann, coming from Boston and heading to Portland during a massive blizzard known as the Portland Gale. All 130 passengers and more than 60 crew perished. Remember the Portland. In 1900, the population of Gloucester is 26,000. In 1903, Boston American season is the third season for the pro baseball franchise that later becomes known as the Boston Red Sox. The Boston Americans finished first in the American League with a record of 91 wins, 47 losses, 14 and a half games ahead of the Philadelphia Athletics. Boston goes on to participate in the first World Series ever held between the American League and National League champions. The Boston Americans win the 1903 World Series in 8 games over the Pittsburgh Pirates. The good old days. The team, managed by Jimmy Collins, plays its home games at the Huntington Avenue grounds, presently the site of Northeastern University. There's no doubt that many of Gloucester's Boston Americans fans attend a number of games in the first World Series, traveling by train from Gloucester to Boston. On August 4th, 1909, Gloucester Day organizers planned to attract 20,000 people to Stage Fort Park for the comedic pageant, The Canterbury Pilgrims, by Percy Wallace McKay. This pageant is advertised as the greatest open-air performance ever attempted in the country. It's part of a fundraiser for a proposed replication of the Roger Conant House, which was presumed erected by and for Roger Conant in 1623 somewhere in Fisherman's Field, the original having been floated to Salem. The proposed building is to include an event and gallery space with its basement containing facilities to be used as a rest house. President Taft plans to attend the pageant, which will be preceded by a grand parade. A commemorative ribbon gold medal is designed to present to President Taft. Similar medals are being sold to the public for 50 cents to raise funds to build the Roger Conant House. Those were a good investment too. Because of a crisis at the last moment before the pageant, President Taft sends his regrets. The production goes on and goes well, with over 2,000 citizen participants and an audience of 5,000. In 1913, Gloucester resident G. Allen Brown composes the Gloucester High School song. Lyrics to the song are written by John W. Black, Jr. As they help us remember all Gloucester High School graduates, students, and teachers in their rendition of the Gloucester High School song, please welcome back David Benjamin, Paul Frontiero, Jamie Klopotowski, Tim Klopotowski, and Larry LaRoe. The Gloucester High School song. I think we should do that once more. Now that we know the words. David? All right, here we go. All right.
Over
to do that on the boulevard at sunrise. Are you ready? Thank you to the band for that wonderful rendition of Gloucester High School song. On a sad note, in 1914, World War erupts in Europe. U.S. President Woodrow Wilson pledges neutrality in sync with prevailing American public opinion. Recently graduated young men of Gloucester High School classes of 1913 and 1914 most likely cannot imagine the trajectory their lives will take. In early April of 1917, they had a hard time with the copy machine that produced this copy. So,
Here. Read that part,
Yeah,
and I'll look
okay.
it away.
yep, in early April 1917, with the toll in sunken U.S. merchant ships and civilian casualties rising, President Wilson asked Congress for a war to end all wars that will make the world safe for democracy. On April 16, 1917, Congress votes to declare war on Germany, joining the bloody battle optimistically called the Great War.
Still good? Still read this.
In 1917, George A. Norton writes what will become a hit song for the time, "Round Her Neck She Wore a Yellow Ribbon." It is first recorded as a single recording on February 1918 by Byron G. Harlan. Copy machine failed again.
Just gonna play it so it's okay.
Okay.
This is all it is about. We're gonna read that after.
Yeah, yeah. It's a catchy tune. And it was in the top 10 by our recent American bandstand or Casey Kasem standards for those who fondly remember what those are. This song and many other melancholy tunes are written to keep spirits up at home and on the war's front overseas. But more often, they are wistful tugs at heartstrings for loved ones waiting for the doughboys to come back from over there. And that recording, you can tell, was very scratchy. Recording was a bit different in those days. The great 1918 influenza pandemic, also referred to incorrectly as the Spanish flu. I can't get enough of it either. So the 1918 influenza pandemic was incorrectly referred to as the Spanish flu. It's found to be an exceptionally deadly global influenza pandemic caused by the H1N1 influenza A virus. Sound familiar? The pandemic breaks out near the end of World War I. The earliest documented case in March 1918 in Kansas is followed by cases recorded in France, Germany, and the United Kingdom in April. 2 years later, nearly a third of the global population, or an estimated 500 million people then, become infected in 4 successive waves. Hundreds of thousands of victims perish. Malnourishment, overcrowded medical camps, and poor hygiene, exacerbated by the war, promote bacterial superinfection, killing most of the victims after a typically prolonged deathbed. 250 Gloucester residents die of influenza in 1918. In 1920, the population in Gloucester is 22,947. The first international fishermen's race is held off Halifax, Nova Scotia, between Lunenburg's Delawana and Gloucester-built Esperanto. The Esperanto wins the series of 2 races skippered by Captain Marty Walsh, who receives bragging rights, a trophy, and a whopping $4,000. In 1922, the first modern carillon, or carillon, in America is installed in Our Lady of Good Voyage Church. Mussolini ceases power in Italy. The North Shore Arts Association is established. In Ireland, the Irish Free State is established. W. Sterling Burgess designs the Essex-built schooner Puritan, said by Joe Garland to be maybe the finest and fastest Gloucesterman schooner ever built. Puritan meets her premature end on June 23, 1922, striking the western bar off Sable Island. The Puritan is a total loss, though 15 crews survive, with a loss of only 1 life. Gloucester begins preparing for her 300th year anniversary in 1923. Now, we're gonna have Alan come up.
Got another page left.
Oh, I know that, okay, all right. I'm reading the stage notes here. Pay no attention to what's happening behind the curtain. Okay, so we've covered a lot of daily bits today from the lives of our ancestors, family members, and strangers living in Gloucester's 2nd and 3rd centuries. Some were transients who stayed here for a while, then were bound for other ports. Some had roots with here, but left to help, found other communities. Others, many others, were those who served in several colonial and new American wars. A great portion of the men who served their country made the ultimate sacrifice, while hundreds of others, including children, were struck down by pandemics, diphtheria, typhoid fever, and other horrible diseases. Approximately 10,000 men from our port were lost at sea since record keeping began. Joe Garland said particularly of those thousands lost, Gloucestermen, they were called with wonder, schooners and men, so close to the symbiosis, some might say the deadly embrace of town and sea. During our 2nd and 3rd centuries, wave after wave of immigrants, individuals, and entire families chose to come here from far-flung countries. The thread that connects all of them and us is the will to set roots down, to live and grow freely, and to thrive. Our existence as a community is due to our ancestors making sure their children and their children's children were helped up the ladder toward a better future. In whichever century your ancestors lived, whatever country they emigrated from, or whatever they did to support themselves and their families, they were, as Walt Whitman reminds us, all related by life. To close these centuries, and with all our deceased community members in mind, Alan Estes will perform a song he and Frank Tedesco wrote in the mid-90s with the Andrea Gale in mind. This year is the 30th anniversary of the loss of the Andrea Gale in 1991. Alan's song is another reminder that life is fleeting for all of us, and there are no guarantees. Generations pass the life torch to the next generation over and over on land and sea, during horrible wars and deadly pandemics, and in the best of times of our lives. With gratitude for those who are gone, and with the reasons we are here today, please welcome Alan Estes back to perform the official song of the city of Gloucester, Where'd They Go? Alan?
Thank you, Bruce Toby. You were mayor at the time for voting this song in unanimously. Bob, why not? He said, well, why not? So. There's a way that some men go out beyond the harbor's glow, up to drink a living from the sea. But when bitter northers blow, people in the harbor know life is in the hands of destiny. Oh, the cries and the pleas of the women on their knees, praying that their missing fishermen come home. How they howl and they wail for the Andrea Gale and 1,000 sunken fishing boats below. Where'd they go? Where'd they go? But the raging seas refuse to unveil the fatal news, so the broken hearts forever long to know. The fishermen from Gloucester go where the winds of fortune blow. Danger is a sober certainty, but nature brings its tempters low for reaping what they didn't sow. It's the toll for harvesting the sea. Oh, the cries and the pleas of the women on their knees, praying that their missing fishermen come home. How they howl and they wail for the Andrea Gale and 1,000 sunken fishing boats below. Oh, where'd they go? Where'd they go? And they gather at the church when they've given up the search. Now the loved ones left behind will never know. As the years come and go, generations keep harboring hope. Holy church candles burn, only widows wearing black dresses yearn, longing to learn where'd they go. always go out beyond the harbor's glow, where courage meets its opportunity. Lonesome foghorns call from home, beacons search the great unknown, for they that go in ships down to the sea. Oh, the cries and the pleas of the women on their knees, praying that their missing fishermen come home. How they howl and they wail for the Andrea Gale and 1,000 sunken fishing boats. Oh, where they go, where they go, where they go, where they go.
Thank you very much, Alan, for an wonderful rendition. Let's give him another round of applause. And now I'm pleased to bring back to the microphone our good friend and one of the tri-chairs of the Gloucester 400th Anniversary Committee, Bruce Toby.
Well, I'd say this was quite an afternoon. Quite a cast of folk. I'm not going to dare to try to thank everyone. I know our two narrators, Beth and Bruce, were superb. I know that our students who recited, who did a skit, and were game as the devil for doing it, both did great jobs, Emily and Calvin. Our musicians, David and company back there, from the national anthem to the Gloucester anthem, they didn't let us down. Alan Estes, incomparable. Thank you, man. And looking ahead to next year, as we discuss our 4th century, which still awaits illumination, thereby kicking off a few days thereafter the real deal, the 400th anniversary year of 2023. Can we thank the lady who put this together today, Lynn Parisi. And just to plug a few things, I'm not sure that anyone's told Beth yet, but this spring in a May time frame, we'll be doing an old style thing. If you look at the old style pictures, historically unacceptable now because it was all men, you'd see these groups in the local clubs would get together for banquets, and they'd all line up at their tables for a group photo, with the evening being one of good food, good drink, good fellowship, and a fine speaker. And we're going to honor that tradition. Open house, men and women alike, certainly. Come May. Stay tuned for more details as we finalize that speaker schedule and get things ready to go. And last but not least, I have to talk about that folding board there that Alan is graciously doing Vanna White on.
Holding it open.
Thank you for that. Our 400th anniversary first casting, first round of the medal to commemorate this event is on sale. The bronzes are at the Brass Monkey on Main Street. It's a fine piece of sculpture, perhaps most especially because it was a young Gloucester woman who did the work that honors our city's 400th anniversary. So again, thank you, by the way, most of all of you for being here. You're hearty souls in the time of the pandemic, and we're grateful that you came and shared this afternoon. Go forth, be safe. Hope to see you all again soon. Thank you.